On Friar Podcast, coming to you on a Wednesday, Darnay trip, joined by Todd Strain. Not our usual Thursday time slot, but for good reason. Todd Strain finally had some action out of Petco Park today after a couple days waiting around to see what would happen and what the fallout, if any, would be once the Padres leadership team, Peter Seidler, his Seidler equity partners, Eric Grupner, AJ Preller, Bob Melvin got together and traded notes and set a course for the 2024 season, and we appear to have that. So we are here to discuss that with you on a Wednesday afternoon. This might replace our normal Thursday. I don't know if we'll do one Thursday. We'll see if Derek has any strong feelings on the matter, and maybe he's got some stuff that he wants to get off his chest. But unless there is a notable development between now and then, shifting our days this week. We had the bonus episode on Monday just to kind of speculate about what was maybe happening in the organization and what might come down the road. But now we have some answers to those questions. And so we will discuss. And Todd, I had to steal a day off this week. And you know how this goes. Whenever you decide on the day that you're going to take, the thing inevitably happens. So
you cursed yourself by taking today
off.
I
knew it was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen. So you're in the podcast studio. I'm at home, but we'll still spend a little time talking about what we heard from AJ Preller, our thoughts on where the Padres are going, and whatever else comes up. There are a few interesting notes, some personnel notes, maybe the addition of a front office position, and obviously AJ Preller reacting to some of the criticism and reports and all that. So we'll get to that. First things first, thanks to OG's, the sponsor of the On Fire podcast for over 30 years. OG's has been crafting award-winning microbrews with over 60 medals in international, national, and regional competitions. OG is one of the most decorated breweries in the world, with each OG's location having 12 proprietary OG's beers on tap. They're constantly updating their menu. Did so this year. Had a bunch of new items, including the Mediterranean Salmon Bowl, some specialty pizzas, buffalo cauliflower, a Nashville hot chicken sandwich. You can also take advantage of OG's loyalty program. It's super easy. You can do it online and earn loyalty points for rewards and exclusive offers, all of which leads to fun and free food. And ordering online from OG's is now easier than ever. You can get OG's straight to your door. Okay, time for the walk-up music. All right. We wondered when this day would come. We wondered who would be involved. We wondered if we would get to be in Petco Park for this address. It ended up being just AJ Preller. It ended up being via Zoom. And as it turns out, the Padres, for all intents and purposes, Todd Strain, are running it back.
Whole lot of nothing from that press conference. Whole lot of nothing, Darnay. I don't think we learned anything insightful. We didn't learn anything concrete after he said, I'm back, or after AJ said, basically, I'm back, which we knew already. And he said, Bob's coming back. Nothing insightful. No questions were answered. A lot of deflection, a lot of just spitballing by the Padres president of baseball operations, which I don't know if I can blame him. That's how AJ Preller operates. So anyone who is seeking clarification or clarity to any of these questions or aspects of the Padres moving forward or answers, you're not going to get them in that setting from AJ Preller.
Yeah, he tends to be a bit evasive and vague in these settings, and so not a shock that would more or less be the case. Again, I think there are a few somewhat interesting tidbits. I think in general, just going into it, taking the whole thing, kind of big picture. when there was all this criticism, it was interesting because he almost sounded contrite in the beginning. He talked about feeling like it was a missed opportunity. And so it seemed like kind of there was some responsibility there and feeling like they had all these chips in place and didn't have the right season. And it seemed like there was some measure of kind of accountability there. But that was sort of as far as it went, based on, my understanding and kind of my perspective on it. I thought what was interesting was, there were some direct questions about the reporting of, Dennis Lin, Kevin Acee, in particular. And let me find, because I tweeted out some of kind of the quotes and responses, some of which I thought were interesting.
Well, his big
Bernie
one was it's
Bernie
overblown.
Wilson. Yeah, Bernie Wilson, friend of the podcast, and longtime Padres beat writer for the Associated Press. Not afraid to ask a direct question, and he had a very direct line of questioning to AJ Preller. Even mentioned the report of their relationship, he and Bob Melvin being described as a civil war. And AJ said, part of his answer, I think the anonymous quotes and the unnamed sources, we don't give any credibility to that. He said, from that standpoint, a lot's been overblown. And I think overblown was a word he used on multiple occasions just to kind of describe some of the reporting, what was written, what had been said. And so that I thought kind of jumped out to me because there didn't seem to be a whole lot of like any admission that, yes, we have some things to work on. Things weren't great from that standpoint, and we're kind of mending that. Now, there was, of course, a lot said about assessment within the organization and what we need to do and processes and this and that. That's where it got kind of vague. But you could tell he kind of pushed back a little bit on, some of the reporting of the tense nature and perhaps dysfunctional or unhealthy nature of the relationship. What I do think is interesting is, he discredited a little bit the anonymous sources and said, hey, you need specifics and voices attached to this to really be able to kind of go anywhere with it. But then I think about what CEO Eric Grupner said on Ben and Woods on the flagship when he was asked about this, and he said something along the lines of, anonymous sources, but what was reported wasn't wrong. And so you have one person in one corner of the building saying, it's tough with anonymous sources, but we don't think these reports were inaccurate, essentially. And then you have AJ Preller saying, anonymous sources, we give no credence to that. So make of that what you will.
Well, mixed messages coming from the Padres organization. That's kind of par for the course, right? Should we be surprised by that? Also, following up on what you said, AJ tried to normalize things. I think he tried to normalize his relationship with Bob Melvin, which it doesn't take a genius to figure out is not a normal GM baseball manager relationship. Yet he tried to normalize it. Bob Melvin was not there. He was not present. I wish in hindsight somebody asked where Bob Melvin was and would he be available, because once again this is AJ's revisionist history on the season and his interpretation of his relationship with Bob Melvin, saying it's kind of, like we have dialogue. Every MLB team has dialogue, but conversations is a favorite AJ Preller term, conversations between GM and manager. That's just how it is. He tried to normalize this discord. And I think when you're talking about Ken Rosenthal and Dennis Lin and AC, those are well-sourced articles. They're not just making this up. And so it's not surprised me that we are getting mixed messages from a Padre organization that has a history of those, Darnay. It was more of the same from AJ Preller. If you've heard him speak publicly at any time, this is just how he speaks, and it's a whole lot of nothing, as I said, unfortunately. I mean, we've seen this movie for 10 years now.
Yes. There's a lot there. I think he did mention, I think you kind of touched on this, one of the instances where he said something was overblown, that was in reality something along the lines of, we do this every year. We did this last year after the NLCS. and that they have open and honest talks during the season as well. And he said, using Bob's words, something he said yesterday, he's excited. So yeah, a lot was made about Monday. I think there's probably maybe more to it than he let on, but maybe there wasn't. Maybe there wasn't really a true assessment. Maybe there wasn't a thorough assessment of the organization, and maybe the plan was just to kind of roll it on forward through Bob's last year. That's another interesting kind of tidbit to this. Bob and Marty Caswell said, and she used the words lame duck season for Bob Melvin going into his final year of his contract. AJ Cassavell followed up on that, like, so what can we make of the future of Bob Melvin? And that was another instance where AJ didn't provide a real clear answer of any sort. Just like, hey, these are matters we're not really getting into. And so there doesn't seem to be any assurance of Bob Melvin's future beyond this season. We also don't know, part of that is Bob Melvin's decision. There was a report previously that, he might be done after this contract anyways. And so maybe that's still on the table. And I do think we should, whether or not we should hear from Bob Melvin in the, short aftermath, near aftermath of the season. We just heard from, and this is a different situation. I don't know if the Mariners were ever going to fire Jerry DiPoto and Scott Service, but we saw them sitting together on the dais, yesterday, talking about their situation for a long time. And, this should not be limited to a Zoom with AJ Preller. There should be an opportunity for us to talk with Bob Melvin before spring training. And I feel like that's a disservice to us as we try and do our jobs. That's probably not the most important thing, but I think, fans as well, getting a chance to hear the perspective of the manager after a trying season, after these conversations were had, and now this decision that they're going forward, having heard from AJ Preller and now getting a chance to see what Bob Melvin's perspective is and see if all that aligns.
100%. And that's kind of the crux of it, because what AJ Preller has been saying for multiple years, his managers don't necessarily echo. So even if we heard it from AJ today, maybe Bob Melvin disagrees with some of the things that AJ said today. So you would have a chance to follow up with Bob and ask him his interpretation. Does he see it how AJ just said he saw it? So that was harmful, not having Melvin there. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Melvin was there and AJ was at a press conference last year together. So that's a different thing. And moving forward with Bob as manager, a couple things can be true. Rarely does a manager of his stature head into a final season as a lame duck manager. That's just usually does not happen. His agent doesn't allow it to happen, and he doesn't want that to happen because of how you handle the locker room and the respect and the cachet you need. Secondly, Melvin may be a little bit different because he has insinuated that he doesn't want to manage much longer. So he may be okay at the same time heading into this as kind of a last hurrah. And I don't know if the Padres had a lot of options. If you decide you're kind of stuck with this roster, which seems to be the general inkling, and you maybe think you have the power structure in place organizationally, and you like manager Bob Melvin, you like AJ Preller, the thinking on their end may just be, let's just run it back one more year. This is an all or nothing year. And if this doesn't work, Melvin's gone, AJ's out, and it's a fresh start. It would take a big organizational commitment to change the GM at this point when you have so much invested in these players, and vice versa. The manager, when you're to change the manager, when if they go bad next season, the GM might be changed again. So those are big changes that the organization, I don't think, was ready to make. I think for the organization, they wanted to run it back one more time. That's easiest for the organization. And I think they believe that's the right thing to do.
And it's easy to see how they would justify that given, some of the fluky aspects of this season. To AJ's credit, he never spun that as part of the narrative. He did address kind of some of the weird numbers, but basically said, hey, your record is who you are, and our record wasn't good enough. And so I was like a little bit relieved that you didn't all of a sudden get like run differential and all these things brought up to say, we were actually kind of good. And I don't think AJ ever went down that road. And so I think that's one thing fans wouldn't have really been able to stomach is the front office trying to convince them that they were actually good and that they were wrong about what they saw about their team, and that wasn't the case. And so I think that was a bit of a relief. And you're right, especially with whatever's going on with Peter Seidler, and we wish him the best. Maybe the timing of it just kind of made it difficult to make massive changes, given his just kind of uncertain health status and whatever his involvement is and the involvement of others, close to him, within the Padres and within, his equity firm. And you're right. I think, if 2024, I think it can be pretty black and white. I sit here now, maybe I'll feel different in 12 months, but I think it can be pretty black and white after 2024. Did you make the playoffs? Okay, we press on. Did you not make the playoffs? Everybody's gone. I mean, go ahead.
I agree with you 100%. And did these issues, personal relationship issues between Melvin and AJ, did they persist, or were you able to work it out?
Yeah. Well, and then Melvin's contract is up, and so you can say, hey, we're going to go in a different direction. He can say, hey, I'm good. Couple comments. If you're watching on YouTube, appreciate it. There's a handful of you out there. Hit the chat. We'll get to your comments. So appreciate you watching. When we do go live on YouTube, you can always catch episodes after the fact on the NBC7 YouTube channel. You can catch us on the NBC San Diego streaming channel on Roku, NBC7.com, and of course in your podcast app. Rusty says mixed messages are what you get when you hold a press conference without all the principals in the room, which is a very good point. AJ wants to be Ron Burgundy, anchorman for the Padres. He wants the news to come from he alone. But I think that's a really good point. It's easy for AJ to kind of say whatever when there's nobody there to kind of balance things out. And I think lack of balance, might be part of why we're here and why there's some skepticism. Another comment: let's end the season for good and let the overpaid Padre employees work their problems out. Now onto a few things the city can be proud of: Aztecs basketball. So one individual out there that's had enough of the Padres and is ready to turn the page to the reigning national runners-up.
Well, hey, Darnay, if you want to be a contrarian and say, well, this is just AJ, he wants it his way, and we don't really believe what he's saying. The narrative, if you don't accept, like, hey, Bob Melvin's coming back at this point, there is that alternate narrative where, sure, Melvin has agreed to come back and move forward, but maybe the Giants are talking to him and a deal is going to get worked out there in the coming days, and Melvin may circle back to the Padres and be like, hey, I've decided I want to take this job. Can we work something out? So even though AJ said we're moving forward with Melvin, until you hear it from Melvin, I think it leaves a little bit, leaves the door open for potential change if Melvin so desires to make that change, which I still don't think is going to happen, but it's a possibility that we can't discount without Melvin being in the room today or being in the Zoom.
Yeah, I think that's fair, that there might be a little bit of fluidity there, even though I think we both expect that he will be back. And Melvin also seems like a pretty straightforward guy, so I don't necessarily think he'd be the type that would go through the last couple of days and then go up to San Francisco. I think he'd probably say, hey, this is what I want to do. This opportunity's there. Go ahead and announce it and we can kind of move forward. So, I don't know Bob Melvin, but he doesn't seem like the type of guy that would, kind of go about it in sort of a backdoor, indirect manner. One thing I was kind of thinking, again, just kind of a big picture thought, there's been so much of kind of choosing sides. Are you a Preller person? Are you a Melvin person? As far as Preller goes, I think if you are fine with AJ Preller, you think he does a good job and it was a fluky season, then you're probably fine with this and no big deal. We'll run it back. The guys are going to put up numbers that more closely resemble the backs of their trading cards, and we're going to be fine. And I think there's certainly a segment of the population that are out there. I've seen them on Twitter. They've replied to posts and that sort of thing. So I think there's a segment of the fan base that's like, we're fine. We're going to be fine. This is a weird year. No reason to kind of change course. If you're of the mind that AJ Preller shouldn't be doing this job anymore. He's had enough time to kind of prove that he's the guy and he can create a winner. It hasn't happened. If you believe that he's the source of some of these issues within the organization, I think these situations are an opportunity to kind of win that group over. And I wouldn't say that happened. I wouldn't say that there was much of anything said that if you're among the skeptics, that you'd say, okay, yeah, that's a good point. We're kind of doing things differently. Maybe there's different boundaries set on how he operates and how involved he is and all that. He's going to be kind of in his lane and staying there. And there really wasn't anything to suggest that the dynamics, anything along those lines will change. And so if you're skeptical there, I don't know if there's any reason for you to feel any differently now.
100%. As I said, today's press conference was a whole lot of nothing. Nothing changed. Preller didn't say anything of substance. Nothing he said will influence you to change your opinion, Darnay, one way or the other. I did find it interesting. He just continued to downplay his involvement with the coaches. As you says, he refused to say that was a problem or an issue, and he refused to say that things will be different moving forward, which to me is a red flag and a bit concerning. That those both jumped out to me as like, that doesn't sit right, I don't think.
Mr. Munoz isn't happy that Preller is coming back. Disappointed to see Preller is back. Very doubtful anything will change. And I think, I think a lot of people that are skeptical of AJ Preller will probably remain skeptical of AJ Preller after this, and just hope that all the stuff we saw on the field kind of, reverts to expectations, and some of this behind the scenes stuff might not be as prominent or as much of an issue or a story. Yeah, I mean, he talked about that stuff. He talked about how he's like, there's collaboration in every organization. He's like, I can't think of any organization where it's completely separate. And he's like, that doesn't work. That's not how it works. And do I know how the Giants and the Tigers and the Rays and the Yankees operate? No, not necessarily.
Well, here's what I'll say. I just wanted to hit you right when you said collaboration, and that's a word that we've talked about a lot, that AJ says. The questions that were asked and the things that come up are words like meddling and spies within the organization and civil war and lack of communication. And AJ he doesn't use those words. He doesn't address those words. He says things like collaboration and open dialogue.
Healthy disagreement.
Yeah. So he's not addressing the questions or those issues, whether they're real or imagined. I think they're real. I think most people would think they're real. So he's just talking around those things. So it's not, there can be flaws in relationships and in organizations. There are problems, and it helps to address those, I would think, and kind of say, we've made changes this way, or those are a little bit, we need to fix them this way. Here's what we're doing to do that differently. And there's been none of that in today's Zoom.
He was asked, I think I think the question was from Marty Caswell, and about like his history with managers, the dynamic there, and issues that have arisen in the past. He described it as open and collaborative, hire talented people and allow them to do their job. And I think that's been the narrative, and what's been written, and what you sometimes hear is that there isn't necessarily that trust to be like, he's Bob Melvin, he'll figure it out. That that Preller has a tendency to kind of want to grip tighter on the steering wheel and say, hey, we need to do this, and maybe have more of a voice, more influence on-field matters than a GM typically would. And it doesn't sound like it's limited to just like, hey, what do you think about this? No? Okay, cool. Moving on. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I'm going to voice my thing and then let it go. I think that would be fine. It sounds like there's a little bit more to that. There was also an interesting point. There were a couple points where you could tell like his posture changed and he got a little defensive. And it was when Marty asked that question and he said something like, well, in 10 years, I've hired 3 managers. And I think if you look around baseball, that's pretty consistent with what you have around the league, for that period of time. And Andy Green's doing a lot of heavy lifting in that, his 4 years from 16 to 19, that makes up a good chunk of that 10 years.
The difference, I think, just to point out, Preller's correct in saying that, but at the same time, if most of those 10 years you've had losing seasons or fallen underachieving what you want, most GMs don't keep their job.
Yeah.
Most GMs that make that many hires have a track record of success. So once again, that's a little bit of spinning. He's addressing the issue, but he's kind of spinning it where it gets back to like, how does he still have his job?
And I think, this is where, and we've heard this before, and I think it has been, I think some portion of the fan base kind of rolls their eyes at it when he's asked about his track record. He at one point kind of pointed to 2020 as like, well, that's the year where it really started.
Yeah.
That's a year where we really expected to compete. Everything before that. And, as a fan, how do you feel about that? You're going into a rebuild. It's going to take some time. It's almost like 2020, like that's when they were supposed to kind of compete for championships, and they made it to the playoffs, albeit in a short season. If it was a 162 game season, they don't make the playoffs because they run out of arms. Like we saw what happened with Mike Clevenger and Nelson the Met. But it's almost like they got a new runway because they've really competed once. They competed in a short season, 15 or, midway through 14 on when he got hired. Obviously what happened in the international draft or, international signings in the draft, trades like Tatis, you sign Hosmer, you sign Machado, those things happened. That was kind of all the runway to 2020. And, the runway's kind of stalled out a little bit. You know what I mean? Like we haven't reached cruising altitude. It's like we got to 30,000 feet and then like there were some storms. And so we had to kind of dip down to like 15 or 20,000 feet. And now we're making our way back up again. But I think that's just it's an interesting and I think probably frustrating way to look at it as, okay, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 5 years, especially when you look at what the Orioles have done in a similar time frame, like the last 4 or 5 years, whatever it is, how they've flipped this. Preller got 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. He got to the playoffs, went down here, went up here, went down here. That's it's a really, really long runway, almost like 2 runways.
Yeah.
And I get it. They didn't expect to compete in 2020, but it's not like they just flipped a switch in 2020 and they are a squad and have been a squad ever since. It's not been the case.
And it's also going way back. I think it's a little bit disingenuous by Preller because when he traded for Matt Kemp, he assembled that team. Remember, he traded for a lot of stars or players who were well into their prime. And the talk at that point was this team is going to win with these guys. So I don't continue think that is a runway season. When you're trading for Matt Kemp, you're not trying to build, you're trying to win now, especially acquiring Kemp at that point of his career. So I thought that was a bit disingenuous by AJ saying we started in 2020, but you're exactly right. He likes to point to that year as the year they started. A couple other interesting things he was asked about payroll and what that number was, and he just kind of rehashed like we're gonna have meetings on that a little too early. We'll see what number we arrive at, but that's definitely going to go down. And then the Snell and Hader stuff he kind of danced around. He gave we'd love to have both those guys back. I don't know if that's even close to a reality. So those are still issues to figure out, payroll numbers and Hader and Snell.
I don't think he was dishonest. And he pumped up Snell for Cy Young, said Josh Hader, it's a guy that could be in Cooperstown. We'll talk to them. Those, there's the types of guys we want to be in our organization. I know he certainly said that about Snell. And we'll sit down with Blake and Scott Boras and we'll do the same thing with Josh. I wholeheartedly believe that they will have conversations
100%.
with Blake Snell and Josh Hader and their representation. They will bring them a number. Those guys will probably look at them funny. and then they'll go to a different team. That's what I guess. So I don't think he was dishonest.
No.
But do we expect those guys to be around? Probably not. I know Blake seems to really like it here. Both those guys post on Instagram. I think Josh Hader doesn't make any sense. It's just too much money for a closer, especially somebody that doesn't have a whole lot of flexibility, even as good as he is. That part can't be denied. Blake Snell, I mean, he always says this is his favorite place to pitch. Seems to have a really good bond with Ruben Niebla. He's obviously had just a incredible season. I wonder with him as a guy that didn't seem to really enjoy the process of going to a new organization, figuring things out again. I wonder if that would allow the Padres to save a couple dollars and get a little bit closer retaining him. But I think ultimately in the end, it's probably not gonna be the case. And you have a team in his hometown in Seattle that, is feeling this pressure to spend. I mean, that would be a logical step there. So we'll see where that goes. A couple more comments from the YouTube chat. Great having so many folks get involved. This is awesome. Albert saying, feels like AJ is a micromanager. The worst ones do not recognize it or make actions more positive. And so that's one of the big questions going forward. Is there any real change to how he operates, what the dynamics are like, and Bob Melvin's comfort level and just being himself and not having to answer to him and kind of make concessions there. Lauren leads me to an interesting point. If Seidler wanted everyone to stay, then this was the best option or best solution. The only tea leaves will be to see who/if anyone leaves that was considered a spy. And that was kind of one of my questions. And I figured this might be the case that Peter gets everybody together and says, you guys are who I think gives us the best opportunity to win going forward. Let's kind of keep this thing together, work some of these things out. My question was, what kind of authority does Bob Melvin have over his coaching staff? And kind of Lauren leads us down that road a little bit, talking about if anybody that was considered a spy, like Don Tricker, might be out of the organization. And
every time somebody says Don Tricker, I think of Dick Trickle, the NASCAR driver, and I get a little bit of a chuckle.
As for the coaching staff, Preller and Melvin will have conversations about that in the weeks ahead. Says they feel good about a lot of coaches on the big league staff. Will nail that down in the coming month. So leaves open the possibility that there are some changes there. And I mean, you have to wonder if some of these guys that aren't Melvin guys, if we're trying to keep kind of a more unified situation here, a logical step would be to give Melvin more authority over the coaching staff. Now, you get the sense that Preller has some affection for Ryan Flaherty. And so that would be a really interesting one. A guy that seems to be a Preller guy. Now, Niebla was hired before Melvin, but he and Melvin seem to have a good working relationship. We've heard nothing to the contrary on that. But the hitting staff, Ryan Flaherty, Don Tricker, others, what does Mike Schilt do? I think he's now been around for 2 years. Does he pursue a managerial opportunity elsewhere? That's what I'm going to be pretty interested in going forward, how they shape this coaching staff. And when all is said and done, does it still look like a group of AJ guys and a group of Melvin guys, or does it look like Melvin has a bit more of a thumbprint on it?
And either way that turns out, whether it's Melvin guys on the coaching staff or Preller guys on the coaching staff, to me, that's problematic if you're making changes to the coaching staff, because what major league coach worth his salt who has achieved anything in this game wants to come in on Melvin's side for what may be a 1-year deal? Nobody wants to come in there with no job security. That's interesting to me. That I would find it hard to believe that you're going to get a lot of coaches lining up to come with Bob Melvin to the Padres when you have maybe minimal support from your front office. On the flip side, what major league coaches that are worth a darn are going to want to come work for AJ Preller when you know Bob Melvin might be gone in a year and you may be out of a job? So for sure, there's some wiggle room with the coaching staff, but how that plays out and who they get to want to come to San Diego under these circumstances is once again more worrisome and troublesome to me. But Ruben Niebla, keeping him is a number one because he has been a magician with that pitching staff. You can argue that maintaining Niebla is the most important decision this offseason of that staff, I think.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people point to, okay, can we find a hitting version of Ruben Niebla?
Ruben Niebla Jr.
Because that, Ryan Flaherty is the offensive coordinator, and the two other kind of like assistant hitting coach types, whatever they are, that didn't work. And this group didn't always seem to have a clear approach, a lot of confidence at the plate. We know the issues in big spots. We know the struggles of stars. And so that would be an area where I would think, yeah, can we find somebody a little bit, I don't want to use the wrong word, but somebody that can help elevate and maybe bring some different information to the table and help these guys perform to their peak, because that's not been the case. And hitting coach has been a revolving door.
I was going to say, Darnay, that's been the case since Petco Park opened. They have failed time after time, year after year, to find a hitting coach that can consistently reach Padre hitters in a positive manner to allow them to hit in the friendly, unfriendly confines of Petco Park. So let's hope finally in year whatever this is of the park, 20, what is it? 20, whatever of the park, they get it right.
Yeah. Yeah, Rusty says when he thinks of hitting coaches on this 2023 team, I think of every Main Street fastball that caught a Padre hitter looking. If only his team hit 0.25 better, they'd be in it. Yeah, there's some truth to that. And yeah, so that's interesting. I would be pretty surprised if, Ryan Flaherty wasn't back. The Mets did want to look at him for, I think, their bench coach position last offseason, and I believe Preller said no. They denied the interview request. So does Flaherty get another opportunity elsewhere? If that's the case, do they say, okay, spread your wings? Or does Melvin say, hey, I've got somebody in mind that's more aligned with me. Can we go down that road?
Yeah. And as I've been echoing for the whole season on the podcast, all these organizational flaws, they're not ideal. They're not great. And they're not traits of a successful organization, but they can be covered up in one season. If the players on this Padres team had met their potential or exceeded their potential and played like they're capable of, all these flaws within the organization would have been covered up by winning baseball. This Padres roster was good enough to win. Next season, the roster's not going to be as good, but I still think the talent on the team can play winning baseball despite whatever flaws remain or are unresolved. So it's not a perfect solution, but maybe that's a sliver of optimism.
Yeah, and Preller was asked about the roster. He's asked about salary cap stuff. He's asked about, of course, the season in general. And he did go to, you win games when guys kind of perform up to expectations, and that wasn't the case this year. And so there's a little bit put on the shoulders of the big four that was given the title Mount Crushmore by Scott Boras before the season. They were not Mount Crushmore. So there was some of that put on, Machado, Tatis, Bogarts, Soto for not always kind of playing up to their, now I don't know what you can say about Juan Soto, but not playing up to their level as part of the explanation for the season that they had. But it's going to require some savvy moves now. And, I think we will do a who should come, who should go pod at some point, because I think there's some interesting conversations. One of them around Trent Grisham was brought up. And, of course, AJ's not going to say, yeah, we plan on moving Trent. So anything he says is a little bit moot. But they've stuck with him now. And it's really been two bad seasons in a row, with the exception of kind of a miraculous performance in New York during the postseason last year that kind of came out of nowhere. I got to think that that's a spot where you try and upgrade or find a different solution. But to AJ's credit, he has found, especially in pitching, he's found good closers on the cheap. You see what he did with Waka. You see what he did with Lugo, Nick Martinez, although Nick didn't have the greatest year. Robert Suarez, he's gotten creative in the pitching staff and had some success with that. And so I do have some confidence that, he'll be able to fill some of those voids. It just seems a bit harder when it comes to kind of the position guys, non-superstar, and obviously they brought in Ha-Seong Kim, huge success. Crone, 2 playoff appearances. He took a step back. But like, remember David Dahl? Remember Trace Thompson?
Yeah.
All these guys, and mid-season acquisitions like Mitch Moreland and Adam Frazier that just didn't hit. For some reason, rounding out the 9 has been an issue. Now, Gary Sanchez was a revelation, but is he now going to be too rich for their blood? Like, so that's the quandary they find themselves in. But he's going to have to get creative in terms of like finding guys in those prove it deals that actually can prove it, and getting guys in there and helping them to kind of reach their full potential, which has been an issue for whatever reason with his team. So that's going to be part of the challenge for him. One interesting thing that came up, Dennis Lin asked about potentially hiring a general manager, because as you might recall, AJ got the title of president of baseball operations a year or 2 ago. Maybe it was last year. And so, some organizations have the president of baseball operations and a general manager. He is lumped into both. And knowing what we seem to know about AJ Preller, probably doesn't hate having kind of more impact and more influence. But he did say that is, let me find this again. That is something that has been discussed, that's been on the table and talked about. I want to say even going back to last year. He said, quote, "We just want to have as good a leadership team as you can have. I feel good about the current group," but said he'd always be open to adding someone who could help the team. I would be surprised. I would be surprised. It would maybe be a good thing, but then if you have like if he's completely in charge of the hiring, then that seems to be kind of more weight on one end, and maybe potentially more difficult for the manager to have a say if all of a sudden it always ends up being a 2-on-1 type situation. And so just as it seemed like Peter Seidler had more influence, and even going back to Jace Tingler, you could tell that like Seidler and Fowler, they seemed to be really involved in those conversations. Now, whether or not they really had their say, Ron Washington, I think was everybody's guess, is another thing. It seemed like AJ would have had a tough time getting away with another first-time manager, and that there was a bit more influence. This is just a guess, me speculating, but a bit more influence from AJ's bosses or boss, on that hire. I would think if you go down that road, there needs to be some counterbalance, and there needs, Bob Melvin's not going to be the one in charge of the hiring, but he should be in on those conversations. He should have some level of input, just given his experience. But then certainly Peter Seidler, some of the other folks there should have some say, so that, just to make sure we're getting the right person and it doesn't end up maybe causing more problems and more difficulty, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think what AJ said was, I may be paraphrasing a bit here, but we value different voices in the room, which means more input on the decisions. And sure, a president of baseball operations to split AJ Preller's job up, a new president of baseball operations would be great. An accomplished general manager would be great. But if that person comes in, as you talked about, who answers to who? I find it hard to believe that if AJ Preller has a GM working under him, that GM is just not going to be a puppet GM, answering to AJ Preller, and AJ Preller can kind of swing him one way or the other. So I don't, even if someone is hired, unless it's someone comes in with a big time resume and a lot of success as president of baseball operations, who has say over AJ Preller, if it goes, Seidler, this new president of baseball operations, then Preller, that to me could be impactful. But I think, as you said, that's kind of a long shot. And any GM that may come in that would be under Preller, I would find to be kind of a puppet GM. I may be surprised, but I'm dubious again. Just that's kind of the word I'm coming back to. Dubious and unsure, and nothing that was said today lends any clarity or direction. That was the one thing I was disappointed about in today's press conference, because I understand the reasoning for bringing everyone back, but it would be great if AJ Preller said, "Hey, we had some things. The communication was bad. I maybe overstepped my bounds a little bit. I'm going to work on this. Bob's going to work on this. We believe we can make these changes together and be better moving forward. X, Y, and Z. This is the reason why." And I think Padre fans, not all of them, as you said, but a large percentage could understand that, and they would like to hear that. Today, there was no acknowledgement, and there was no clear path on what is changing and a path to get more success within the organization. It was just a lot of meh.
Charlie says Seidler let a huge opportunity go by not poaching Orioles assistant GM. Forgive me if I don't get his name. I've seen his name passed around a lot, and obviously, given Baltimore's ascent in recent years, it makes sense. Yeah. Sig Mejdal, if I'm not mistaken. The man helped expedite their rebuild and establish their analytics department single-handedly. That is a name that has been brought up in Padres Twitter in kind of speculating what the future might look like and a potential replacement for AJ Preller. And so if we're going based on the comments, some disappointment in what we heard and the news that we have today, at least as it pertains to AJ Preller. And yeah, I do agree. Like, this was an opportunity to, you restore a little bit of confidence when you say, "Hey, we mess up in this way. We're addressing that. And we're going to do better." And that wasn't, we heard about processes and this and that, but was there like real accountability or anything like that? I didn't get that sense. Do I feel like a whole lot's going to change? Probably not. But the fact of the matter is, they could run it back, or you could start 2023 all over again, and the season could play out completely differently. That's the nature of baseball and all that. Now, does that mean that this is the right decision? No, not necessarily, but we could be sitting here doing post-playoff game recaps a year from now, and nobody would be surprised. But the fear is, like, some of this underlying stuff continues to creep up 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road. And, if these issues that have been reported on are true, and there are a lot of similarities between what The Athletic wrote in 2021 and again in 2023, it seems to point to something. And, what we heard today doesn't make you believe that is seen, addressed, acknowledged, and will be fixed. It's more so, hey, we're going to continue to communicate, healthy dialogues, a lot of voices, trust people to do their jobs. Some of this other stuff is overblown, unnamed sources. We don't give them any credence. It was a different tone.
Well, very few professional sports organizations who are successful would allow these things to fester and these issues to come up year after year without sustained success on the field. So I think that's where the majority of Padre fans' frustration comes from, because I think they would see other organizations would address some of these changes before now and not allow this to keep happening, whether you're an AJ guy or a Melvin guy or an Andy Green guy or a Pat Murphy guy.
Don't leave Jay Stingler out.
Jay Stingler. This wouldn't fly in other professional sports organizations. So I think that's a big part of Padre fans' frustration.
Michael, a couple of comments, and thanks again for getting in on the chat. This has been great to get your thoughts on the matter and have something to react to. And so definitely when we go live, hit us up. We'd love to get you involved. Michael Lee says, no changes means same mediocrity, bad owners, not addressing very real problems of chemistry and the relationships between manager, players, and micromanaging. AJ, new GM intermediator between Melvin, talk with a new person to remove the conflict between AJ and Bob Melvin, must be immediately hired in between. I do think there are fans out there that are saying, okay, just as Bob Melvin is a reflection of his team, just as AJ is a reflection of Bob Melvin, just as Peter Seidler is a reflection of all of this. And I think there are people, wondering, there's going to be some questions about the owner at a certain point, just like you say, hey, if the team isn't performing, if you're having to hire new managers, that might be an issue with the GM. If there continues to be this instability and some of these problems that creep up every couple of years, and you've had opportunities to address them and it hasn't happened, that might reflect on the owner. And we of course have immense respect for what Peter Seidler has done, and certainly for the city and the population around Petco Park. But aside from that, like just strictly from a baseball standpoint, if things fester and if this isn't taken care of after this, I think people are gonna wonder about Peter Seidler and the job he's doing as strictly the owner of the San Diego Padres. We need to wrap this thing up, Todd. But an interesting day. I don't know how I expected it to go, but an interesting day. I hope that we hear from Bob Melvin. It'd be nice to hear from Bob Melvin. It'd be nice to hear from Eric Grupner. It'd be nice to hear from Peter Seidler. And we wish Peter Seidler the best in health, a quick recovery. I hope he's doing great. But there's some questions unanswered. 15 seconds. Your last word, Todd Strain.
This press conference today was kind of like the whole season. We thought there would be change. We thought things would be better. We thought it would be different the next day. It was just the same. Where they just played underwhelming baseball. Today's Zoom press conference, underwhelming, mirrored the season. Perfect symmetry there.
And the off season begins. Thanks, Todd. Thanks for everybody watching and listening. And we will be back with you soon. Take care.